Keep your wellness routine going strong all summer. Kachava's new travel packs help you stick to your daily ritual even when you're on the go. Just one packet of Kachava's all-in-one nutrition shake provides complete nutrition wherever you are, with 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, adaptogens, and more. Simplify your daily ritual. Go to Kachava.com and use code NEWS for 15% off. That's KACHAVA.com, code NEWS.
Pitching national unity. The Premier of Alberta makes her case, as will Pierre Poilievre. This is Now You Know. I'm Rob Snow.
Navigating the issues that matter to you. It's Now You Know with Rob Snow on News Radio.
Making the case for a united Canada, with the calendar counting down to an October referendum on Alberta's place in Canada, the Premier of Alberta making the case for a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. That was Danielle Smith's sales pitch to attendees at a fundraising dinner for the United Conservative Party of Alberta as she defended her decision to put the matter to a vote.
There are those who are asking, why are we having a vote on Alberta separation at all? And the answer to that is simple. We believe that when an issue is important to Albertans, they should have a way of putting those ideas forward. And that's why our province has a law in place that allows Albertans to initiate a province-wide referendum if they get enough signatures. Ignoring the law and kicking the can down the road would only prolong a very emotional debate. And we just simply can't muzzle the voices of our fellow Albertans. And that's why our government added the following question to the referendum. Should Alberta remain a province in Canada, or should the Government of Canada commence the legal process required under the Canadian Constitution to hold a binding provincial referendum on whether or not Alberta should separate from Canada?
During her speech, Premier Smith said she would be voting for Alberta to stay in Canada. She added there are people who want Alberta to stay in Canada and people who want Alberta to leave Canada. And then she said there are people who just want to send Ottawa a message.
And I can tell you, I share your frustration, but I would suggest that there is a better way to do that. Our federal politicians may stray away from our foundational values from time to time, but our fellow Canadians, they are our neighbors, our friends, our family. We all know our family has a few bad habits to break from the past decade, and we are working on them, and we'll get there. But there's still more work to do to make Alberta stronger and more sovereign within a united Canada. So, for that group of folks, those of you who want to send a strong message to Ottawa, there is another way to do it. That is why I'm asking everyone here tonight to vote to remain and then vote yes to the other 9 referendum questions on the October 19th ballot. Together, those questions send a very clear message that Albertans expect fairness and respect and a stronger voice within Canada.
In just a couple of hours from now, another Federalist voice will make his feelings known about Alberta's place in Canada. The leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, an Alberta MP these days, will make a speech during a lunchtime event in Calgary. Poilievre's staff leaked some of his talking points to the news media ahead of this event. During the speech, Poilievre is expected to argue against Alberta separation and instead push for different policies from the federal government, such as better gun control measures, more tough-on-crime laws, and policies that promote natural resources projects. In the past, Poilievre has vowed to campaign for a united Canada and has said all of his Conservative MPs will do the same. But he's also said people must understand why Albertans are mad.
Well, I disagree with separation. I'm a Canadian patriot. I was born and raised in Calgary, Alberta, and I understand the frustration. I still think that there's no other country in the world where someone of my modest origins would be able to make it to this place. And that's the story that millions of people have lived and relived from across the country. So we are united by that Canadian promise. But as I say, and I say it here and I've been saying for years, we have to put a final end to this notion that Ottawa tells Alberta to pay up and shut up. And that's what Albertans have been told by this Liberal government for a decade. Their frustrations are entirely legitimate. Alberta is the number one net contributor, per capita contributor to Confederation, paying more in tax than getting back in federal programs. The major industry of Alberta has been under relentless attack for the last 10 years.
Poilievre's view of Alberta's frustrations and the upcoming referendum are not shared by the new leader of the NDP, however. Speaking recently in Ottawa, suggested the Quebec or Alberta separation movement is aligned with MAGA in the United States.
The separation movement in Alberta has no point of comparison with the historic sovereignty movement in Quebec. This is a MAGA-aligned, potentially funded, disruptive movement that has been really thrown into national prominence by Danielle Smith addressing this question that a portion of her base, a small minority of Albertans, the vast majority of whom want to stay in Canada, don't want to have a referendum that will rip the country apart.
So that principle
it's not the same thing. There isn't the history. This is I think this is a flash that's been driven by an extreme portion of Danielle's base, and she's got a big problem on her hands. She tried to have a question for a question, and it's going nowhere. Nobody's happy. But this is an internal Alberta problem right now, and I don't believe that there will ever be a referendum.
Later today on Parliament Hill, former NDP MP Charlie Angus will do a news conference. Angus wants a public inquiry into foreign interference in the Alberta separation movement. When asked a few weeks ago of Premier Smith's plan to have a referendum on having another referendum, Prime Minister Carney called the threat of separation a dangerous bluff.
This is an observation from experience. In these separation issues, it is often advanced that vote for this and it's a free option. Vote for this and we will strengthen our hand in a future negotiation. That is a very dangerous bluff. That is a very dangerous bluff. I saw firsthand what happened in the United Kingdom when the view was vote for this, it'll be soft, and then we'll negotiate, etc. And they ended up, and they're still 10 years later trying to undo what people didn't think they were voting for, but what they ended up having.
Today, the Prime Minister is wrapping up his attendance at the ceremony installing Louise Arbour as Canada's next Governor General. Later this week, he will be traveling again, this time to France and Ireland. Mark Carney will be in Paris for a meeting with Emmanuel Macron, and then go to Dublin for a meeting with Michael Martin, the leader of Ireland. Then he will attend the G7 Leaders Summit in Evian, France. He'll be out of the country for about a week. I'm Rob Snow. This is Now You Know. This is News Radio.
There is no question Rob won't get answered.
Now You Know with Rob Snow continues
On News Radio.
A weak GDP report, debates about a recession, but then a strong jobs report was released this past Friday. All of it as the Bank of Canada readies another announcement on interest rates this week. Let's learn more about what's happening with the Canadian economy. Sal Guatieri is back with us. He's senior economist and director at BMO Capital Markets. Thanks again for joining us.
You're welcome, Rob.
How big of a surprise was the employment report on Friday? 88,000 jobs created.
Well, it was quite I wouldn't say a shock, but it was surprisingly strong. 88,000 jobs in 1 month. That's about 5 times the norm that you see in any particular month. Now, maybe we were due for some payback because, unfortunately, we did see job losses in the first 4 months of this year, and the increase in May, as large as it was, did not fully retrace or erase all of those declines, which were more than 100,000. So it was perhaps some payback from that weakness. Overall, though, it does suggest that our labor market is moving forward. We're not seeing a lot of hiring, widespread layoffs in the labor market, but unfortunately, we're not seeing hiring at a very strong rate. I mean, the May numbers definitely exaggerate the amount of hiring that's going on in Canada's economy. It is good to see the unemployment rate, though, move down 6.6%. So it actually is lower than a year ago, despite the trade war and more recently the Iran conflict. But again, that's getting some support from just the immigration restrictions and the very weak labor force growth. So overall, it's a much welcomed increase in jobs for Canada, but unfortunately doesn't erase fully what we saw in the first 4 months of this year. And even if you look in the past year now, up 147,000 jobs, but about 4/5 of that increase is just in one industry, and that's healthcare. So labor market, it's moving forward. Companies are hiring, just not at a very fast rate.
When you look at the GDP reports coming from StatsCan, what explains the weakness?
Well, I think the main thing is just the trade war. We saw Canada's economy, which was doing remarkably well prior to the start of the trade war more than a year ago, basically just come to a screeching halt in the spring of last year because of the sharp drop-off in exports to the U.S., and in business investment because of all the uncertainty tied to trade policies. And that really, very much was the story for the past year now. More recently, of course, businesses worried about the supply disruptions and higher costs stemming from the Iran conflict. But really is the trade war that's been the fundamental source of weakness for Canada's economy. So 3 of the past 4 quarters, we've had declines in GDP, back-to-back quarterly declines. So meeting the technical definition or popular definition of a recession, we're not there yet as far as a true recession, because we're just not seeing the depth of the declines in the past 2 quarters that you normally would see during a recession. And we're certainly not seeing the breadth of the declines. They really are not spread across most regions or sectors or expenditure areas. So we think the economy is still growing, but at a very modest rate. It's kind of crawling forward. We do have to get a lot of this uncertainty about trade policies behind us, and unfortunately, that may not come until we get a little more clarity on the USMCA negotiations.
Okay. So with that being said, what are you expecting from the Bank of Canada on Wednesday?
Not much. We think the Bank of Canada will just sit tight, not just on Wednesday, but basically for the foreseeable future. It has grown a little concerned recently about the upturn in inflation, even though basically all of that increase is due to gasoline prices. But it is worried that we could see a more generalized rise in inflation if there are further supply disruptions emanating from the Persian Gulf. But for the most part, given how weak the economy is, and again, until May, how weak the labor market is, we really do not believe the Bank of Canada will raise interest rates. The economy just would not be able to withstand higher interest rates. So even though the market is pricing in a 1/4 point rate hike by the end of this year, we just don't see it.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time today, Sal. Great to hear from you again.
Thank you.
Senior economist, director at BMO Capital Markets, that's Sal Guatieri. No rate hike on Wednesday, he says. I'm Rob Snow. This is News Radio.
You have questions.
Now you know with Rob Snow has the answers.
On News Radio.
If you're ever looking for a podcast of our show, now you know with Rob Snow. I encourage you to download our app. It will help you hear our show when you want to. Listen live, listen to the podcast. It's called the Seeker app. That's Seeker, spelled Seekr. It has all kinds of exclusive audio that you won't hear anywhere else. News, music, and sports. You can download Seeker for iOS or Android. That's Seeker, spelled Seekr. And now you know with Rob Snow is also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Oil prices are starting the work week with a slight move up. WTI oil futures up about 1.5% today, back to $91.50 US a barrel. Brent prices up as well, just slightly 1 to 1.5% higher, 94 $1.60 US a barrel. Gasoline prices across the country range from an average of $1.82 a liter in Nova Scotia, while in Ontario it's closer to $1.67, although higher in Kitchener at 171.9. The average gas price across Alberta today, 163.6, although closer to 169 in Calgary. And in BC, there has been a slow decline in gas prices. The average gas price across BC is $1.88, but in many places across Vancouver, it is still above $2 a liter. In sports, the Toronto Blue Jays have just wrapped up a series win against the Baltimore Orioles, a 6-4 win yesterday at Rogers Center. And the homestand continues tonight with the Jays opening a series against the Philadelphia Phillies. The Phillies having a pretty good season so far, 5 games over 500, in second place in the National League East behind those red-hot Atlanta Braves. And the Phillies are coming in hot, winners of their last 4 out of 5. The good news for the Jays is that some of their injured players are getting close to returning. Max Scherzer threw a bullpen session yesterday and told Hazel May of Sportsnet he would be available to pitch against the Phillies maybe on Wednesday. Dylan Cease could make an appearance this week. He's been sidelined with a hamstring injury. Dalton Varsho still listed as day-to-day with a sore wrist. Tonight's game, 7 p.m. Eastern time on Sportsnet. Patrick Corbin on the mound for the Jays. Should be absolute mayhem in New York City tonight. The NBA Finals make their return to Madison Square Garden. Game 3 between the New York Knicks and San Antonio Spurs. U.S. President Donald Trump expected to be there cheering on the team of his former hometown. And on Air Force One, Donald Trump had some thoughts on the Knicks, on the national anthem, and on the price of tickets.
Did you get a chance to watch Game 1 of the NBA Finals? What'd you think?
I did. Well, I'll be going to Game 3. I guess it's Game 3 on Monday. I thought it was amazing. I think the Knicks have an amazing team, the way they played. Started off slow, and it just got stronger and stronger. Wemby looks like he's going to be a great player, but they really played well, I thought.
Quick follow-up. Did you see Wemby crossing his arms during the U.S. national anthem? Did you have any thoughts on that?
I did not see that. Is that what he did?
He did, yes.
What did he mean by that?
Nobody asked him.
Well, I guess you have to ask him.
Well, who's your favorite Knick?
Well, Brunson's fantastic. Towns is fantastic. They just have a great team.
What do you think that the game you're going to, the cheapest price for the game 3 you're going to is $8,000? Everyday Americans can't afford these sports.
Well, I know, but they can watch it on television. It's sort of semi-free to watch it on television, but that's the way life goes. You know, you have some, and now if the team wasn't a big success, you could go very easily. So, you know, you can do that too, but that's the way life is. You know, they've had great success. And don't forget, they've suffered also losses, and they've suffered during the bad time. Now they have a good time. They have a team that's amazing. I don't think they've lost a playoff game, right? Very unusual. Has that ever happened before? Has anyone ever had this kind of a run in a playoff game?
Donald Trump on the NBA Finals. Tickets are $8,000, Mr. President. People can watch it on TV. That's the way life is. 8:30 Eastern time for that, with the Knicks leading the series 2-0. With our Monday Newsday panel with federal politics in focus. Welcoming back Matthew Dube, Vice President at Proof Strategies. Hello, Matthew. How are you?
Hi, Rob. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Oh, so good. It was so tempting to take the day off. The weather is so nice, but we are working hard. We are working hard. Alex Chreston is with us from the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Vice President at Crestview Strategies, where they're getting ready for World Cup fever. Hi, Alex. How are you?
Good, good. The sun is shining right across the country, it sounds like. Beautiful day here
very
as well.
Good. Excellent, excellent. Well, let's start with drama on Parliament Hill. There have been a series of stories from the press gallery in recent days that Prime Minister Carney, quote, punches down at caucus all the time. Quote, he yells. Quote, the experiences have left a lasting imprint on several MPs. Quote, he's not interested in complaints. quote, some believe Mr. Carney's tone crosses a line and will ultimately come around to hurt his support among caucus. Matthew Dube, what is your reaction to this sort of caucus business, which is supposed to be super top secret, spilling into public view?
Yes, I have a lot of feelings about this, Rob. When I was a caucus chair, we had some leaks, and so it's definitely sent chills up my spine witnessing this, although I guess I'm relieved that I don't have to manage it on the back end this go around, obviously. But look, there's a lot to unpack here. I think the fact is that caucus meetings are always going to have attention to them because it's an opportunity to raise issues. And quite frankly, when things are hunky-dory, often people don't say anything. That's true in politics. It's true in life and many other professional settings. People usually raise things when there's a concern or an issue. So it's going to gear a bit more negative. Usually we like to say, when I was chair, I used to call it like a bit of a pressure valve, right? Like, if you have something to get off your chest, do it in that room because it's certainly better than running to the media with it. And I think that's where the Prime Minister runs into trouble. The fact that the conversations are tense, I don't think is new for anyone who's ever been in a caucus meeting. And I'm certainly not being an apologist for toxic meeting spaces in politics or elsewhere. But I think that's just a reality in politics, given the pressure cooker that it is. Where I think the Prime Minister is running into trouble is not respecting the fact that caucus, in part, is to manage those things. So it's fine to disagree. It's fine to debate. But I think there's a bit of a dismissiveness that's actually more concerning than even the allegations of yelling and whatever else is being said, because those things happen, unfortunately. It doesn't mean it's right, but it wouldn't be new with this Prime Minister. But I think he has a caucus management challenge on his hands when it comes to at least hearing people out and making sure that they're on side. And the last point I'll just make, Rob, is it's probably new for him as well, where there's a leader of a party, sure, and a lot of those MPs got their seats either newly elected or in many cases saved by his leadership. But at the end of the day, MPs are peers as well, right? So it's a unique relationship in that sense. Yes, you're the leader, but you're also a bit of a peer. And I think that's striking me as something challenging for him to navigate. And we've been talking about that, quite frankly, since he first got elected.
Okay. What do you think, Alex Chreston? This is supposed to be private. You're not supposed to read about what happened in a caucus meeting, and yet I'm reading about it in the pages of the national newspapers. What do you think here?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a sign that things are not going well around that table. The fact that people, feel the need to go out and talk about it, and the fact that they feel confident enough that they can go out and talk about it. Look, we've got a rare circumstance here where we have a prime minister who has come to power without any say in who most of his caucus are. Usually the leader would be much more involved in that. But because of the unique circumstances here, he has a whole bunch of people. And when, he will often sort of dismiss issues as things that he inherited, from the former government, although it's the same party. He's also inherited this caucus from the former government, and it's clear that he does not have time for a lot of these folks. Now, what does that really mean, and what does that mean to your average Canadian and to your Canadian business? That's folks who are looking to make sure that they can keep making payroll or keeping food on the table? Not a heck of a lot. So I think when we hear about this kind of bickering and these kinds of complaints, and it sounds like it's so petty and selfish. I don't think that we're hearing that MPs are saying that they're not getting the results for their ridings that they would like, that they're not getting the voice of their constituents represented. They're hearing that their own voices aren't being heard, or we're hearing that their own voices aren't being heard and that their feelings are hurt. And I think that the MPs who are complaining about this need to give their head a shake if they think that this is what the average Canadian cares about.
Sure enough. But if it's a problem, well, let me ask you this, Matthew Dube, since you've been in this role, if it's a problem, whose problem is it to fix?
Yeah, I mean, it's the leader, it's the prime minister. I think the caucus chair has some responsibility. I mean, look, James Maloney is a great guy, a good MP, but I've heard some of his comments, and they tend to skew much more to sort of balancing the concerns of the leader. And I think when you're a caucus chair, I mean, I'm not sure how the Liberal caucus does it. In our caucus, it was an elected role. But you try to balance both, right? Like you want to protect the leader of the party, especially when, the leader has a role like prime minister, but then also balance the needs of caucus to be heard, right? I'd push back on what Alex is saying a little bit. Like people don't get up in caucus to just, talk about their own personal vanity or issues, right? Whatever they're raising, they either feel it impacts their ability to be reelected or it impacts their constituents. One of the alleged exchanges was around an Indigenous issue, for example. So, yeah, these things maybe don't matter day to day these days, but in the long-term viability of a government and a party, these things can start to matter quite a bit. And I think that, again, it sort of strikes the question as to how they're managing things. Like I mentioned, the caucus chair, obviously the prime minister, the leader himself has a responsibility, but there's usually others in elected roles, not just staff, because often you'll fall back on that. I'm not trying to be disparaging to staff, but who have sort of our caucus liaisons almost, right? Even though they themselves are in caucus. Sometimes it's the whip, sometimes it's the House leader, someone who has the ear of the leader, but who can also interact with these MPs. I appreciate the prime minister can't talk to 100 some odd MPs one-on-one every single day, but usually you have to govern that accordingly, right? And frankly, that's something the prime minister should appreciate because it's not unlike what it's like in business, right? The CEO can't talk to everyone, but you have your partners that can do that and try to smooth things over with your team.
Gotcha. Okay. When we come back, what is happening with these reports that the Carney government is seriously backtracking on online streaming regulations and the streaming tax, for example, which the CRTC said it was going to move to 15%. It seems it's all under review now under Prime Minister Mark Carney. Is Carney caving to big tech? This is News Radio.
Critical thinking is not dead.
Now you know with Rob Snow.
Returns on News Radio.
Talking politics on a Monday with Matthew Dube, Vice President at Proof Strategies, Alex Chreston, Vice President, Crestview Strategies. There's a report today that says the Carney government will, quote, direct the broadcasting regulator, CRTC, to scrap its requirement for foreign streaming platforms to fund local news and niche broadcasters in Canada. Last week, the government told the CRTC to review its decision to triple the streaming tax to 15%. Any lost revenue for news and cultural industries will apparently be replaced by government funding. Alex Chreston, what do you think of this?
Well, I've always thought that this was kind of strange anyways, this idea of, that there's going to be that the streaming companies are going to need to contribute to news and journalism and niche broadcasting, where they seemingly have no interest in that, and then the government, on the other hand, is going to increase taxes to pay for it. So ultimately, it's not them paying for it; it's us paying for it. And so this seemed like a strange setup all along, and maybe yet another thing, another legacy of the Trudeau government that Mark Carney is more than happy to jettison.
Okay. Do you think that this is how it will be described, Alex? Because this was certainly the take last week. Carney's caved to big tech because they have the ear of Trump. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I know. I've certainly heard it described that way. And I think that that's maybe a little too simplistic. Is this about, caving to big tech, or is this about, figuring out who is going to pay for this, for these services? And ultimately, it wasn't big tech, right? It's maybe big tech's asking for this because they want to lower their prices, or they want to keep their prices down. But it wasn't big tech who was paying for it. It was the taxpayers. So if he's caving the taxpayers, those are good people to cave to.
Okay. Well, I mean, it has been cited, Matthew Dube, you know this, it has been cited as a trade irritant, certainly on the American side, all of this stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Rob, just before I continue, I'll just disclose out of respect for you and your listeners that I'm registered to lobby federally for SOCAN on this issue. So I wanted to make sure I was upfront about that. But on the trade front, for sure, I think that's the thing that really jumps out to me. It's funny, people talking about caving to big tech. Big tech has had, or, foreign streamers or whatever, however you want to identify them, have had the same position for quite some time. But so have the Americans, funnily enough, including under President Biden. President Biden's administration was also outspoken on these issues. And I think where that leads us, I think, is to just wonder how many cards the government will have left at the table when it comes to negotiating. I mean, I appreciate that sooner or later this might have happened in order to bring the Americans on side. But when you're negotiating, I mean, I wonder the distinction here that troubles me is between table stakes and what you actually bring to the table in terms of leverage and things that you can turn around. So I definitely think that that's an interesting question to pose on this front. And it's not limited to this issue, right? You think of the digital services tax, defense spending, the work that was done beginning under the previous government, under Justin Trudeau, to deal with the, apparent issues with fentanyl that are dubious, the claims that were quite dubious of President Trump. So there is that aspect as well. And I think the government's messaging is also interesting around this, just making it very domestic focused, even though the specter of the U.S. position on this is ever present.
Okay, when we come back, Pierre Poilievre in a little more than an hour from now makes his pitch for United Canada in Calgary. And we'll talk about his people leak some of what he's going to say to the news media. And I would like to run it by our panelists today. What do they think of the message? When we come back, this is News Radio.
Now you know with Rob Snow continues on News Radio.
With Alex Chreston, Matthew Dube, Monday political panel here on News Radio. Pierre Poilievre in a little more than an hour from now will make his pitch for a United Canada in Calgary. At a business event in Calgary, parts of the speech leaked to the news media. Quote, "You will find speaking of Albertans, you'll find they do not have a problem with fellow Canadians or even Canada. They have a problem with the federal government. Unblocking resources and pipelines, respecting firearms owners, locking up criminals, relieving taxpayers, respecting provincial autonomy, unlocking free enterprise. We know that these are the things Albertans have been demanding." Alex, what do you think of the core message there that we may hear from Pierre Poilievre later today?
Look, I think the core message is spot on. I think that he's demonstrating respect for Albertans and respect for the grievances that they have, and trying to refocus them or reframe them as issues that they have with this federal government and with federal policies, and not as issues that they have as existentially as whether or not they can remain a part of Canada. It sounds like that's going to be the thrust of his pitch through this referendum, where I expect that he'll have a lot more to say, and this won't be the last time that he weighs in. But dismissing Albertans' views and grievances, obviously, as an Alberta MP, would be very bad for him in this case. But I think that it also would be a bad tone to set from anybody outside of Alberta.
It seems as though, Matthew, this is my opinion, it's a message of it's not a Canada problem, it's a government problem. It's a federal government in Ottawa problem, and the other provinces have problems with the federal government in Ottawa. Join them. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a bit of the challenge in threading this needle, right? Because I think there's a risk in making it look like it's more of an ideology thing than something that's generalized bad federal policy. So in other words, there's an implication, or perhaps more that implies, that if there was a conservative government in Ottawa, this wouldn't be a problem. And I think that's where there's a bit of a risk, right? Because then you start to portray this as as more of like, almost like a political hostage taking where you're, saying, hey, elect a government that we prefer, and then everything will be fine. Whereas I look at even coming where I'm from, where, support for yes in 95 in Quebec was almost 90% in my old riding. Like it didn't matter who was in power, that these were fundamental things for a lot of those people. And granted, I think it's okay to talk about grievance, and I think it's totally appropriate in part for the reasons that Alex listed. But I also think there's a way to make it less ideologically driven. I mean, David Eby's also said that about the federal government, right? Being an NDP premier in BC, saying we don't feel listened to. Lumber's always forgotten. It's always steel and aluminum in the trade war, right? So if I was advising Pierre Poilievre and having been down this road, with my own constituents of having to make the case for Canada, I think there's a way to speak to alienation and grievance without making it sound like the solution is a different partisan stripe in Ottawa, but rather making it about fundamentally how Ottawa interacts with particular regions or groups. So again, I suspect that is what they're trying to do ultimately, but it's a pretty fraught political gambit when it just looks like you're saying, elect me instead, and this will all go away, because I don't know if that sits well, particularly in places outside of Alberta.
Okay. Great to hear from both of you today to start the week. Alex Chreston, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Speak soon. Yeah. And Matthew Dube, Vice President of Proof Strategies. Thank you, Matthew. I'm Rob Snow. Talkback is coming up next. I'm going to turn the camera around and look at the news media today. Trust in the news media, government funding for the news media. There could be more of that. I need your thoughts on it on Talkback today on News Radio. This is Now You Know. I'm Rob Snow. Welcome to Talkback. 2 hours of debate and discussion on the big issues of the day. The media is today's topic. Trust in the news media. Government funding for the news media. Here are some questions for you. Do you trust the Canadian news media to report the news accurately and without bias? What would you say? When you read your favorite news website in the morning, maybe you still get a print newspaper at home, or you watch the supper hour news. Do you trust the Canadian news media to report the news accurately and without bias, to play it straight and tell the truth? Do you trust the Canadian news media to do that? That's the first part of the day. The second part is, how do you feel about the Canadian government giving financial support, financial aid to Canadian news organizations? Money from the government to news outlets, so news outlets can keep staff and hire staff who report the news. Is that something you're okay with? Or is that something you disagree with? 1-833-668-2577. I want to know your answers to these questions today. There's a reason why we're asking them. We talked about it in the first hour. News report today in the Canadian news media that the Carney government is going to scrap requirements that had foreign streaming companies like Netflix, like Amazon, Apple, Google, Disney, force them to contribute a portion of their revenues to help fund local news in Canada. And the Carney government is doing that because it is a trade irritant with the Americans, with the Trump administration. Now, this news comes just a week after the Carney government told the CRTC to back off on its plan to raise the so-called streaming tax to 15%. It had been 5%, and the CRTC was going to raise it to 15%. And part of that money from that tax goes into a fund, and then the money of the fund would go in part to, say, local TV news outlets like your local television station. Now, interesting that in this report, it's being reported that this comes just a few weeks after Prime Minister Carney went to New York City, and while he was there, he met with the CEO of Netflix, Whether or not this came up during this meeting is anyone's guess, but it's certainly been a big issue for companies like Netflix. And now it's in the news today that the tax that Netflix has to pay to help fund local news is soon going to be no more. According to reporting in the Globe and Mail today, the money that was supposed to be coming from these big tech giants, these big streaming companies, is going to be replaced by more government funding, which means more government funding going to the news business. And there are those, even in the news business, who say the government shouldn't be doing that. The government shouldn't be funding the news media because the news media is supposed to report on the government and hold the government to account. And how can you trust the news media to hold the government to account if it's taking money from the government? They make the case that it contributes to an erosion of trust in the news media when that happens. How many times have you heard it? Oh, the Canadian media, it's bought and paid for. Or the liberal funded mainstream media, bought and paid for. Well, according to this one report in the Canadian news media, some media outlets, local news, local TV news for the most part, could soon be in line for more government funding to replace the money from U.S. tech giants. That's going to dry up because a tax that was brought in by the previous Liberal government is going to be scrapped by this Prime Minister of this Liberal government, Mark Carney, in an attempt to advance trade negotiations with the United States, get a deal with the Trump administration. That's kind of the background of the issue. It's why we're asking these questions today. Do you trust the news media in Canada to report the news accurately without bias? How do you answer that question? Do you trust what you see in the Canadian news media? And how do you feel about the government helping to fund the news in Canada? How do you feel about the government giving financial assistance to news organizations in Canada? To hire staff, to keep staff. Are you okay with that? Because it's important to have Canadian news. It's important to have local news. Or is that something you're against? Because maybe it compromises the news. And news organizations shouldn't be taking money from the governments they cover. Tell us your opinion, please, as we start another week of Talkback. The government didn't ask me to ask you these questions, so I came up with them all on my own. Do you trust the news media? Should the government be funding the news media, financial aid to the news media, to keep news reporters on the payroll? Where do you stand on that? 1-833-668-2577. It's our call-in line. If you've never called before, just mention that, and we'll make your call a priority. And let's talk about trust in the news media and whether you think the news media should get financial help from the government. Lots of industries get financial help from the government. Is it different when it comes to the news media? 1-833-668-2577. I'm Rob Snow. This is Now You Know. This is Talkback. So talk back on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
It sure is on a Monday. Our topic, the government and the news media. The government and the news media. Do you trust the Canadian news media? That's our first question. Do you trust the Canadian news media to report the news accurately without bias? And should the government offer financial assistance to help fund the news in Canada? How do you feel about that? Be very curious to hear your opinion on that. 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. Kyle is a first-time caller in Calgary. Hello, Kyle.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, very good, Kyle. Do you trust the news media?
Not even slightly.
Not even slightly. Why is that?
The corruption is just obvious with the media. The bias that's there. You look at anything that they run. I mean, just look at our prominent federal leaders. Anytime you watch the news, you see just endless pieces about Carney and elbows up and how great he is. And for every 50 they do of those, they'll do 20 of Polyev, and 19 of them will be negative. And it's just not even so much that, it's just the corruption they hide.
The government corruption they hide, you mean? They're not covering government corruption enough? Okay, and you think there's a liberal bias, that the media is more friendly to the liberals than, say, the conservatives. Is that fair?
They're friendly to every new agenda cause, whether it's the liberal politics, whether it's woke politics, it's just all pro that.
Okay, so it's more, you think there's a left-wing bias then, fair to say? A left-wing bias?
100%.
100%, okay.
If you look at the conventional definitions of left-wing and right-wing, which I don't 100% ascribe to, but yes.
Yes, okay, fair enough. Now, I've outlined the issue here that the Canadian news media is going to lose a stream of funding from these online tech giants, and the Carney government, according to news reports, is simply going to replace that funding that was coming from those companies with taxpayer money, meaning it will be more taxpayer money for news media in Canada. How do you feel about that?
Since when have tax dollars supported media outlets? I'd hazard to guess largely that's only been a thing of the past decade.
Yeah, but how do you feel about it?
I'm very much against it.
And why is that?
I think that's fairly obvious that you stated it's just whose hand are you going to bite when they're feeding you?
Right. You think it erodes trust, right? That you
100%.
You can't appear to be 100% objective if you're in the news media if you're taking money from the government.
That and other things, yes, very.
And other things, okay. What about this? I'm just bringing this up as a counter argument, Kyle. The news is important, and local news is important. Whether in your town, whether it's the Calgary Herald or the local television station, or whatever the case might be. And it's been struggling and it needs a source of funding. What about that?
Well, either like any other company or other entity like they used to, find your success or die. I mean, largely CBC could die.
Okay. Okay. I would just say there are all kinds of industries that get help from the government. Right?
Sure, but are they swaying popular votes and the ideology of people? What's that old saying? You control the media and you'll control people's minds?
Okay. All right. Interesting. Thank you. You do think it's different for the government to offer financial assistance to the news industry as opposed to other industries. You've got us off to a good start, Kyle. Thank you. Staying in Calgary, Taylor is on the line. Also a first-time caller. Hello, Taylor.
Hi, Taylor. Hi, Rob. How are you?
Hi, Taylor. I'm good. Good to hear from you. Do you trust the news media?
I do not.
You do not? Why not?
At this point, no. I would piggyback on the last caller in saying that the bias is obvious. Kind of long for the days where, the news used to just report the news, where it was what happened in the world versus what we should feel about what happened in the world and whatever person we deem important is saying about it. I think it should just be a full observation and people should be able to make up their own mind.
Right. Just the facts and only the facts is what you're interested in. What do you think? There's too much opinion in the news?
I think there's far too much opinion in the news.
Far too much opinion in the news. Okay.
I think that, if you look at the states, for all their flaws and all their strengths, they do have CNN and they do have Fox News, and both are biased, but they're biased towards their own party. In Canada, especially with talk of state-funded media, because that's ultimately what it would become, well, then that's all we have.
Right. So when it comes to government aid, again, that's kind of part two. This is government aid to help fund the news in Canada. How do you feel about that? You don't like that?
No, I do not like that. I also think that, if these media outlets and these companies are struggling, well, yes, news is important, but that's on them. I mean, there's got to be other ways for them to raise funding, for them to restructure. I mean, who knows? Maybe somebody else is the premier news outlet for Canada. But what we have right now, I don't think is working, and I don't think the government should pay to keep it.
Should be funding it. Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Yep. There you go. Off to a rip-roaring start today on Talkback. The government. Don't get me started about the government. And the news media. Don't get me started about the news media. We're talking about both of those today on Talkback with your help. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Do you trust the news media, and should the government help fund the news in Canada? Give financial assistance to struggling news outlets in Canada. Rick is in Dartmouth. Hello, Rick.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with the first two callers, Rob. And
so you don't trust the news media?
Not at all. That's why Trump coined the term the fake news, because I'll give you an example of what you're running into, and we'll just take the transgender shooters that have popped up all over North America in the past 6 months. They refuse to identify them, and people know right away that it is, and they only release the news when they're forced to, and people get tired of that. Like, tell the truth. Tell the truth.
Okay, tell the truth. Okay. All right. Okay, that's one example. Okay, that you're using, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And everybody sees that. And people aren't stupid. You know, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time.
Yeah, but what you said, I don't know how accurate that would be. You say, well, the transgender shooters are popping up all over the place. Are they really popping up all over the place?
Well, there's been a huge amount of them in the past 2 years in North America.
But has there been a huge amount of them in the past few years? And how accurate is that? I think I would challenge you on that.
Well, I would say that on the mass shootings that they popularized through the news is what I'm saying.
All right. I mean, for example, there was a mass shooting over the weekend. 12 people were shot. Nothing about transgenderism there, right?
Where
I think
was
there
that
were
at?
a pair of in Ohio, I believe.
Yeah, I haven't read anything about it yet, so I really don't know. So I'm not.
Right,
I'm not going to
Toledo.
comment.
Okay.
Yeah, till we know. And the other thing.
So you think the news media suppresses some things if they're deemed to be like not politically correct or whatever, right?
Exactly, and I refer that, I guess, wokeism, because wokeism is the views of the minority forced upon the majority, and that's my definition of wokeism. All right.
Okay.
Getting back to your other thing about the Calgary Herald and needing funding. Well, I say they need to reinvent themselves. And by that, I mean, I'll give you an example. You know, they all have editorial comments. Well, if you want to open up the comment section, then maybe you should ask people to pay money to make a comment. There's one way to reinvent yourself. I'm sure they could look at it and come up with different methods.
Right. Okay. And as I say, there are lots of industries that always have their hands out for, aid from the government. Look at what's happening with all the industries that are impacted by the tariffs now. The aluminum sector, we need help. The steel industry, we need help. The auto sector, we need help. The forestry sector, we need help. And maybe they do need help from the government. It's tough times in those industries, but it's also been tough times in the news business. Is there something special about the news business that it shouldn't qualify for government funding?
Well, you just hit the nail right on the head, and I'm going to give you an example of it. You said about the people impacted by the steel industry. Well, the steel industry out in Thunder Bay told Mark Carney, why don't you get the pipelines going? Because that's going to reinvent our steel industry here in this country and give us some work. Well, guess what? We ain't seen no pipeline, and signed a memorandum of understanding to get it to the sea in 15 years. Like, that would be a total of 27 years to get a pipeline to the sea. And I heard you say that there was a Diefenbaker government or somebody like that to cut it to the sea in 18 months. So tell me that,
yes, that was,
the new...
yeah. Boy, you pay closer attention to what I say than I do sometimes, sir. I was trying to, I'll have to try and remember when that was that I actually brought that up. But again, do you think it erodes trust in the news media if the government gives financial aid to the news media? There's going to be more of that by the sounds of things.
Well, you're being paid by them, so really, you can't bite the hand that feeds you, because if you bite the hand that feeds you, and then you're not going to get any more funding. So therefore, your investigative journalism is dead.
Yeah. So you think it compromises the coverage, even just the appearance is compromised. It's perceived to have been compromised because of the aid or the subsidy or whatever you want to call it. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a popular opinion, Rick, in Dartmouth so far on Talkback today. Have your say, folks, right after the news. 1-833-668-2577. The latest breaking news is coming up next, and this is News Radio. And our topic today, the government and the news media. Do you trust the news media? What you see, what you hear, what you read, do you trust it? Do you trust the news media? Do you report the news accurately? Do you report the news without bias? And should the government, in this case the federal government, offer financial assistance to help fund the news? It's been doing that for a number of years now, and the amount of funding could be going up. But do you think that's right or wrong, that the government offers financial assistance to help fund the news in Canada? Tell us where you stand on that, please. 1-833-668-2577 to have your say. Let's go to Eric. There are 4 lines available there, by the way. The wait won't be long. Eric is in Halifax. Thanks for calling, Eric.
I trust you and Curtis.
Okay.
And I don't listen to any other station but 95.7. And as far as television goes, CP24. I think you guys should be funded. I don't know for sure, but I think you fellas are a small organization, and you deserve all the help you can get financially.
Okay, but do you think, whatever, because we've heard it already, Eric, some people would say you can't take money from the government and then cover the government. You would be compromised if you did that. You woun't want to bite the hand that feeds you, so to speak.
Yeah, if they're not helping anybody, I would say go for it. Get everything you can out of the government, because the government doesn't want to give up anything. So whatever you can get, take it and run.
Well, okay. But, where you are, for example, whether it's the Chronicle Herald or the Supper Hour News, when you read the paper or when you watch the Supper Hour News, what you see on there, do you trust it?
No, I don't watch them. I don't
why
get
not?
the paper. I don't get the paper, and I don't watch the local news.
You don't watch the news. Okay. Well, that's interesting because, TV news is still a very popular source of news for most Canadians.
But like I said at the top, I trust you and Curtis.
Okay, well, I appreciate that.
I get all the information I need as far as news goes from talk shows. So, I mean, if you guys could get any help, I say go for it, Rob. I mean, geez, I listen to you a lot. And I trust you with my life, man.
Well, okay. I don't know if you should trust me with your life, but I appreciate the trust that you're putting in me and with the help from Curtis to do this show every day, which certainly could use some calls. So 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. You think about this. I mean, the news media is an institution. How many times have you heard it said in recent years? Trust in institutions is being eroded. Trust in institutions is being eroded. And that could certainly mean trust in the news media. It can mean trust in the government. It can mean trust in democracy or trust in the courts or trust in the police. Trust. And there have been various surveys done over the years trying to figure out, well, how much trust do Canadians have in the news media? And, some of what comes back is encouraging, and some of what comes back is downright discouraging for a person like me who spent almost 30 years in the news business. Proof Strategies. We just had Matthew Dube on from Proof Strategies, government relations firm in Ottawa, has what it calls its Can Trust Index. And it includes a section about trust in the news media, framed it this way. To what extent are you willing to trust the following organizational categories to be competent and effective and do the right thing? And the score for the news media was 46%. 46%. Not a great score, but actually an improvement from the pandemic years. Trust in the news media took a real hit during the pandemic years, but only 46% said they trust the news media to be competent and effective and to do the right thing. It's not really encouraging. I mean, it was in the high 30s during the pandemic. At least now it's back up to 46%. But 10 years ago, it was 54%. So it's down, 8 points. Trust in the news media. What about you? Do you trust the news media? Bruce in Calgary, do you trust the news media, Bruce?
Generally speaking, I do, Rob. How are you today?
I'm very good, Bruce. Thank you for calling. And why do you say generally speaking?
Well, because unfortunately, I think we use too generalized descriptions for media. And when you say media, what do you mean by media? What's your
news
opinion
media.
of what media is?
News
just
media.
News, guys?
I'm
news
just talking
media.
about the news media, yeah.
Right. Well, there's been a proliferation of so-called news agencies on the internet, and it can be one individual, or it can be a group of individuals, or it can even be a company. But because there are now so many people that have a voice and have a place to speak with it, that's what's eaten away at some of our trust. The other part of it is, to be really honest, it's talk radio and the media itself. And the internet, because all they want to do, people who get on this, is complain. I listen to your show quite regularly, and most of your audience generally are very negative about things. They're upset about things, and most times the hosts on talk radio don't do much to mitigate that. They're just there to let people voice their concerns. It's like the street corner now. And I think that a lot of times there's times for you guys to bite back on who's on the radio with you at the time, and to sort of say, whoa. And to be honest, you do a pretty good job generally, Rob. I admire that about you. But there is a lot that needs to be pushed back on people who come on the radio and who are in the internet spaces that have that fan unsubstantiated, unfactual beliefs and views, and It's amazing how quickly they get picked up now to be quote unquote news stories, because that's where the news people go to. If you watch the news now, they always talk about, it's trending on the internet right now. Well, it's really on fire on the internet. Well, who cares about the internet? It's a very small percentage of the people who bitch and complain about the news and the negativity and have something to say negative. Most of us are pretty happy. But it's
all right, fair enough. So on part two,
yeah.
Then on trust, because this is about trust, okay?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Do you think the government should fund the news media? Help fund the news media?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I would have to say, given our situation in Canada, we're a little bit unique. We want to have and have fought for a long time to maintain our Canadian identity next to a behemoth called the United States. And their media systems and programs will just roll over Canadian content. And that's always been the big fear.
Right.
How do we do that?
So for you, it's about funding culture. And the news is part of the culture, right? Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
You also brought up a moment earlier about trusting people, but it's about not knocking it down all the time as well. The trust in media was really hit, as you said, during the COVID thing, because everybody who was on one side of the political spectrum said that everything that coming out of the media was a lie and wasn't true. And it turns out that a lot of the stuff that didn't come out of the mainstream medias, but came out of the right-wing side of things or the conspiracy side of things, that funded or fed a lot of the dissatisfaction with the news right now.
Thank you for your call and your honest assessment of things, Bruce. In Calgary today, more of your calls just ahead on the government and the media on Talkback on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
On the government and the news media, do you trust the news media? Should the government help the news media with funding to hire reporters, to keep reporters on staff? Doug is in Kitchener. Hello, Doug. Hi, Doug.
Top of the afternoon to you, sir.
Yeah, very good to hear from you, Doug. What's your opinion? Do you trust the news media?
Okay, so I've been fortunate enough to be on the news a few times, nothing major. And I've also been at events that were reported on the news. So I'm going to highlight two of those for you today.
Right.
Many years ago, I had a renovation company, and I was fortunate enough to win the contract to replace the cedar roof on the Westmount Rose-covered bridge, which is a historic bridge. It's the oldest original bridge in Ontario. So I got called up by a local news station and asked to do an interview at the bridge. We were up there for about an hour on the roof, beside the bridge. I sat down with my family that night and watched it as it was reported, and it was nothing like the experience at the bridge. Everything was scripted or sculpted. Things that I was shown saying on the news were referring to something that was completely not what they were referring to. So, no. And it's something as simple as that. To me, they have a story in mind, and when they present it, they want to present it the way that story catches the most attention or does whatever. The other event was, have you heard of St. Paddy's Day on Ezra Street in Waterloo?
No, not really, no.
Okay, so it's controversial. It's a big party. University of Waterloo and WLU. The students shut down a street in Waterloo, and 15 to 20,000 students are partying there on St. Patrick's Day.
Right.
So regionally and on our news, this is reported as excessive alcohol, drunk, violence, what have you. My grandfather emigrated from Ireland. I've celebrated St. Patrick's Day all my life. So I'm in my 60s, and I'm down on Ezra Street, 15,000 students. I'm in my Kennedy tartan kilt, green hair, green goatee, all greened up, and I never had so much fun in my life. There was huge energy in the crowd, and it was all positive. I met hundreds of people. We chatted.
Right. So you think the news media misrepresented that event, right? You think the news media misrepresented that? Okay, I got you. All right. They have an agenda.
They want to control
There's an
it.
agenda.
They want to cancel it. They're presenting it in the worst case scenario.
Gotcha.
I'm sure
Okay.
some things have happened. You can't have 15,000 people celebrating an event without something going wrong, but nothing like how they present it on the news.
All right. Okay. Where do you stand on government funding for the news? Do you think that's okay, or are you opposed to that?
No, as been said before, when you're paying, it's the same. My customers at work, they get better service than someone that's not paying me, if you know what I mean, right? Customer calls in as a problem, they pay us, so we go look after their problem. Somebody else calls in we've never dealt with, sorry, we'll have to put that on, So you're always getting a better result when it's someone's paying you to do it.
Right. And you think in the news media you would get preferential treatment if you were in the government and you were helping to fund the news, right?
Whatever the government's agenda would be presented, I'm sure.
Fair enough. And if that's not even true, the perception is certainly there. It's coming through loud and clear today. Thank you. Doug in Kitchener, let's stop here. Mike in Halifax, hang on the line. Sean in Cambridge, hang on the line. Paul in Red Deer, hang on the line. Mike in Dartmouth, don't go anywhere. I want to know where you stand on things. It's a hot topic today. The government and the news media and where they intersect. Should they intersect at all? This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Do you trust the news media in Canada? And should the government offer financial aid to news organizations in Canada, government funding for the news. How do you feel about that? 1-833-668-2577. Mike is in Halifax. Hello, Mike.
Hey, how you doing today?
Yeah, very good, Mike. Do you trust the news, Mike?
I'm on the fence with a lot of them. The
All
bigger,
right.
like the big news agencies. I believe CBC is flat out liars, and I'll give you a perfect example why. There was a video going around in social media during the truckers' convoy, and there was a reporter and a cameraman for CBC, and they were saying how this protest was going to be a flop. No one was showing up, and they were showing just drips and drabs of people walking. And there was a guy recording it, and he walked right up to them. He said, "Why don't you turn around and show the people the truth?" And he gave the angle of the reporter. He stood the same way the reporter was looking, and then he turned his phone around and showed the back of the cameraman, and there was thousands and thousands of people. So they were purposely lying and giving a generous camera angle to support what they were trying to say. It was a bullfight.
I will just say, Polera, which is a polling firm, and I know some people don't even trust polling firms, said, first of all, it said the Weather Network is the most trusted news outlet in Canada. Maybe that's because they just do the weather. They don't do the Freedom Convoy. But second was CBC News. 70% say they trust CBC News. You're obviously in the minority opinion there. Let me ask you this.
Was there a demographic, an age demographic for that, though?
No, doesn't say. It's just overall. And then CTV News, 67, Global News, 45%. Then it kind of drops off from there. But let me ask you this. You know that it's been a struggle in the news business. Lots of people have been laid off. Lots of newspapers have gone out of business. Radio stations shut down. The whole thing. It's been tough in the news media. Do you think the government should help the news media with funding, subsidies,
If it's
that kind
equal.
of stuff?
If they're all getting the same amount, yes.
Okay.
And I have no idea who's getting what, but if they're all getting the same amount, that's fine. If they're top loading a certain agency, then I don't think that's right, because that CBC, Global, whoever, if they're on the verge of going out of business and then the government hands them millions of dollars so they don't, well, where are you going to lean? You're not going to want that government to stop giving you the money, or you're going to be out of business. So if it's equal, if they're all getting the same amount, then I think that's great. But
yeah, that's not a ringing endorsement, but I understand where you're coming from, Mike. Thank you for your call. To Sean in Cambridge. We've got about a minute and a half here. Sean, do you trust the news media?
By and large, yes. I trust the national news a lot more than I trust the local news, in all honesty. But yeah, on big issues, I do trust the local news media, the national news media. Yes.
Okay.
They've been demonized by the conspiracy theorist people, but from what I've seen, the media, yes, I do trust them.
You think the media does a pretty good job, and you trust them?
I do.
All right. Okay. How do you feel about the government funding the news media, getting involved in funding the news media?
I have no problem with that. I mean, people assume just because they're getting money that they're going to lean towards the government. I think that says more about the character of the person that has that belief than about the media. I mean, you look at other countries where that happens. Like, for example, in the UK, where the government funds the BBC. The government is quite often very, very upset at the BBC for the things they say, and yet they keep funding the BBC, and the BBC keeps saying those things. So it's not necessarily going to happen like people seem to think it is.
Okay. You don't think the coverage would be compromised at all, or even perceived to be compromised?
Well, you can't control perception, but I don't think it would be compromised now.
Well, you could control perception by not taking the money. That would control it if you were a news outlet, I think. Thank you, Sean. Wow, busy first hour turned out, and let's keep it going in hour number 2 on News Radio. Yeah. Welcome to hour number 2 of Talkback. We have been talking today about the government and the news media. Do you trust the news media? Do you trust the Canadian news media to report the news accurately, to report the news without bias? That's part one. Part two, should the government offer financial assistance to help fund the news in Canada? And bring that up because of a story that's in the news today. It's a Globe and Mail report. Been lots of talk on Parliament Hill about changes to the Online Streaming Act, specifically the Canadian government taxing those big American streaming companies. So think Netflix, think Amazon, think Google, think even Spotify. And what had been happening is they would take a portion of that funding and it would fund cultural industries in Ottawa. And one of them is local news. And now it seems, because this is a trade irritant with the Trump administration, all of that is back to the drawing board. And funding for cultural industries like film and television production, and in this case, today's development, local news, that funding is not going to come from, say, American tech companies. Instead, it will come from the government. Government financial aid for the news industry in Canada. Some people are opposed to that already. I mean, it's been happening, government assistance to the news business in Canada. It's been happening for many years. And now there could be more government funding for the news industry in Canada. But should that be happening at all is my question for you at 1-833-668-2577. There are 3 lines available right now. Let's go to Red Deer. Paul is in Red Deer. Thank you for waiting, Paul.
Hi, Rob.
Yeah, hi, Paul. Do you trust the news media, Paul?
No, I don't.
No,
I
you
mean,
don't.
for the most part, I do not trust the media. No, because you've heard some of your other callers how they were right there while the news media was doing their thing, and it wasn't accurate to what really happened there.
Right. Have you ever experienced that yourself, where you were at an event or you saw something and how it was portrayed in the news media didn't accurately reflect it?
Well, right now I just heard something on your station just a little while ago while I was waiting, and it wasn't accurate, but it was, it's news. It's what makes news, Rob. If it's something that can get lots of people to listen, they'll put it out there. But otherwise, they don't want to put it out there. And as for paying to have the news media, I 100% am against it. But back in the day, I do believe it was necessary. During the war days, I believe it was necessary. But today,
and why don't you think it's necessary now? Why don't you think it's necessary now?
Well, Rob, I have a different view. It's not just on the news media; it's on everything, though. It's like
on everything.
On an arena, like you want to go to the arena to watch, people play hockey. The people that should be paying for that should be the people who go to the arena, not the taxpayers. I don't mind paying to have it built, but I don't want to pay to maintain it. So that's my view on pretty much everything. It's like, if you want to open up a radio station, sure, throw some money in there and open up a radio station. Give them some money to open.
You think the government is involved in funding too many things already and supporting too many industries?
Absolutely,
okay, and it should be user pay.
Should be user pay, yeah, and that would work the best.
And that the owners of the news companies should have their own revenue streams, and not government revenue streams.
Yeah, okay. It should be advertising. It should be, their revenue should be coming in because of how they're performing.
Yeah.
I guess.
But surely you're a smart guy. Surely you know that so much the advertising to the news media, a lot of that is gone now. Right? It's not the license to print money that it used to be. It used to be you could make a lot of money if you owned a television station. It used to be you could make a lot of money if you owned the local newspaper or whatever the case might be. Right? Well, black gold. They used to call the classifieds black gold, right? And now a lot of that has gone to, Google and Facebook and that kind of thing. Well, they're not sending. Facebook doesn't have any reporters at the legislature, and it's not like Google is sending somebody to City Hall to cover what's going on at City Hall in your city, in Red Deer or whatever.
Just before you got in there, I was going to say I actually trust the news more than I do the internet.
More than you trust the internet. Okay. All right.
More
Very
than a
interesting. Thank you.
Crestview.
Yeah, thank you for your call. Let's take another one here. And there are lines available again, 1-833-668-2577. In fact, all our lines will be free after we take Mike's call in Dartmouth. Hello, Mike.
Hello there, Mr. Snow.
Yes, Rob is just fine. Mike,
well,
thank
listen,
you.
buddy, I hate to be mean to you, being a fellow Cape Bretoner, but kind of misinformation what you're putting out there. It's not the government's money. The government has no money except what they stuff in their pockets. So it's taxpayers' money. It's always
right, taxpayers'
money. Then that's
fair enough,
that's
Mike.
truly how it should be worded. Everything
Okay,
that
Mike.
comes through the hard workers of Canada.
All right, then let me rephrase it. Do you think the taxpayers should help fund the news media?
Absolutely not. No.
Why not?
And one thing I'll point out right off the bat is, these guys that are getting $400,000 and $500,000 to sit in a cushy chair and show up and do a news story because they're the lead anchor guy. That's absolutely insane money. They got hairdressers and everything else. Like, what? And that's the taxpayers. Now, as a senior, you know my situation and what I'm sitting in right now under the table. And because I make in around $23,000 a year to live on. And so all this tax money that's going, I don't like it for all the minority situations. I don't like any of it. Like, if you can't start a company and be independent on your own, don't ask the rest of if you open a restaurant and it sucks and it goes downhill, why should the people that are out working hard every day and scraping by keep your restaurant up or your farm or anything else? Like, obviously you weren't geared for that type of work. So I just disagree with it all, Rob. And
So
the
it's
only
sink or swim
really
on your
listen
own. Sink or swim on your own, no help from the taxpayers when it comes to the news media. I got you. There aren't too many these days people in the news business making like 400 and 500,000. There might be a few, but you can probably count them on your fingers and toes, I suspect, these days. Mike, thank you, though, for your call. Back with more of your calls at 1-833-668-2577 on Talkback on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Do you trust the news media in Canada? And should the government offer financial aid to the news media in Canada? That's what we're talking about today here on Talkback. Bertha is up next on line 1. Hi, Bertha.
Hey, Rob. How you doing?
Yeah, very good, Bertha. Yeah, good to hear from you. Do you trust the news media, Bertha?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
And I don't.
Okay.
No, and it's
Well,
not
that's
because I
discouraging.
think they're lying. Yeah,
Right.
It's not that I don't think they're lying, but I think it's all one-sided. And you can tell that just by the guests that they have on the news. And it's like, oh, well, to help us break it down, here's a former NDP leader, Tom Mouclair, or a former advisor to Justin Trudeau. So the guests that they have on, they're either Liberal or they're NDP. Very, very rarely will they have someone, from like the Conservative side or any other views. It's just the views of basically that government. And as for funding, no, the government shouldn't be funding them at all, I don't think.
Okay, and why are you opposed to that?
Because it's kind of like airing out your boss's dirty laundry. And I think that it's a conflict of interest that they're being paid, to be biased. I feel like they're being paid, and that's why they don't tell both sides of the story. They only tell one side of the story.
Right. The news has been compromised in some way, right? That's your impression?
Well, I feel like with all the funding, you're not going to talk bad about your boss, right? And the person that's cutting your checks every month or giving you funding, you're always going to paint them in a great picture because you want that money to keep coming in. And then if you ask for more, it's more favorable. it looks more favorable if you're supporting them.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. And again, not surprised to hear this. This is an issue that I've been talking about for quite some time. Trust in the news media. Trust in the news media. Edelman Trust Barometer. Global report comes out every year. Whole section on Canada. In fact, we talked about some of its findings on a previous Talkback a few months back when we were talking about trust in general. But this asks, and it asks it every year, I trust the media to do what is right. And in Canada, 51% said yes. Only 51%. I mean, I find that kind of discouraging, the fact that I assume close to 49% don't trust the news media to do what is right, whatever that means, to do what is right. I mean, it's better than it is in the United States. 44% in the United States trust the media to do what is right. So it's better here than it is in the United States. But again, not by much. And the numbers aren't much better when you look at something like the Digital News Report, which is put together by the Reuters Institute and the University of Oxford. Trust in news in Canada overall, 39%. That's it. 39%. Trust in the news I use, 48%. But look, whatever way you look at it, that's called a trust deficit. That's more people not trusting what's in the news than what's in the news. Gord is in Calgary. Gord is up next. Hi, Gord.
Hi, Rob. Confirmation bias is loud and clear in the news media. If somebody uses CBC, for example, as their conduit for news, then there's no point in having a conversation because you know where it's all coming from. If somebody uses Fox as their conduit, then there's no point in having the conversation. And herein lies the problem with people is it's very difficult to move people off comfort, confirmation bias. It's very difficult. And essentially you can't. What should be done always is when there is a story, an editor or an owner pick that story. You can figure out by the stories they pick what slant they have. Then you've got to determine what content in that story is true. So you got to search far and wide to find out what it is. It's a lot of effort, actually. But the problem is most people just go, I'm this because they said that. And I'm sorry, it's almost brain drain to listen to the content that's coming at us from every news station because they all have a bias. I have more people than I know, Rob, that, for example, I couldn't stand Justin Trudeau. He's really screwed the country like terribly. He did a couple good things, though, and people go, but you just said you couldn't stand him. I said, I can't. But he did a couple of things that I agreed with.
Right.
I could still not stand him. Same with Donald Trump. Can't stand him. But there's a couple things he's done. Most people that I'm talking about right now could never give a bouquet to anybody they can't stand because they can't think.
Okay. Where do you stand on financial aid, very quickly, in a minute or less, from the government to the news media?
I think government, like government workers, are bloated institutions that just keep retreading people for no reason except their own agenda. To keep having a meeting, to have the next meeting, to get the pension, et cetera, et cetera. It's a massive, massive waste of money. But in saying that quickly, Rob, if you took all of that away, the government would just spend the billions somewhere else to buy votes because most people are too stupid to figure it out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for not being too stupid to figure it out, Gord. Thank you for your call. Gary, hang on. Get to you next. And we have a line for you as well. At 1-833-668-2577. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
We're talking about the government and the news media today on Talkback. Gary is in Calgary. Thanks for calling, Gary.
Hi there,
Hi, Gary.
Rob. Hi. A topic that we've discussed before, and the last time we talked about this, there were some layoffs and station closings. In terms of trust, as a former broadcast journalist, I go up and down the dial and I listen carefully, of course, to the newscast, the newscasters, And I would say, they are generally doing a very good job, and that includes the CBC, although sometimes I cringe at some of the programming. So I think mainstream media, can be trusted. Yeah, there's probably, on occasion, those who are not quite so experienced, not doing the job they should be, but that's on the news director to sort that out.
All right. Where do you stand on government funding for the news media to retain staff, to hire staff? Where are you on that?
I have mixed feelings about that, but it's tough in some small town markets and some medium-sized markets in terms of getting by. So maybe those newspapers, those stations could get the help because they're so important in how they serve the community. When it comes to major market stations, I'm not so sure that's a good thing. There should be plenty of ad revenue to draw from. Of course, the internet is drawing away advertising dollars. We know that.
Yeah.
But I would say, for small market stations, newspapers, they're needed in the community, and I guess it's on a case-by-case basis.
Right. So maybe not in a place like, big city like Calgary, but the term they're using now is news deserts, where there are almost no options for local news coverage. You'd be open to the government being involved there, for example, whether it's a weekly newspaper or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's fair because some of these weekly papers do a very good job for the community. Same as some of the stations. I've listened to some small town stations traveling around that have some very good people, some not only good voices, but good personalities, and they're dealing with issues. I've heard some morning shows that are very good in smaller communities.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. Yep. I'm going to stop here because if I bring somebody on right now, you'd only have about 30 seconds or so. I want to give you more time than that to express your opinion. Since I am soliciting it again today here on Talkback, do you trust the news media to report on the news accurately and with no bias? Financial assistance. It's been doing that for many years, but should it be doing it? Financial assistance to fund the news in Canada. Have your say. Bring you right up to date on the latest breaking news coming up next here on News Radio.
When maintaining your daily wellness rituals is important to you, the change in routine during the summer can feel daunting. Kachava's new travel packs help you stick to your daily ritual, even when you're on the go. Just one packet of Kachava's all-in-one nutrition shake provides complete nutrition with 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, adaptogens, and much more. So you'll be fueled and ready for wherever life or your summer adventures take you. No fillers, no nonsense. Just the good stuff your body craves. Plus, it actually tastes delicious. But you can try it for yourself because the variety pack includes all 6 delicious fan favorites: chocolate, vanilla, chai, matcha, coconut acai, and strawberry. So instead of worrying about sticking to your daily ritual, simplify it with Kachava. Go to Kachava.com and use code NEWS for 15% off. That's KACHAVA.com, code NEWS.
Do you trust the news media? And should the government help fund the news media? That's what we've been talking about today here on Talkback. Let's go. I think Richard is up next in Kitchener. Yes, Richard.
Hi, Rob.
Hey, Richard. Hey, Richard. Good to hear from you today. Do you trust the news media?
I trust the news media to report the news, which I define as the facts. I listen to the news and I listen to opinions of many, and they may be opinions I agree with or I disagree with, but they're not the facts. So in my easy example for the sports oriented, the fact is the Toronto Blue Jays beat Baltimore yesterday 6-4. Some people might say that there was a controversial play involving Ernie Clement and they maybe shouldn't have won that game. That's an opinion. The fact is they won 6-4. That's the news, and I support the news in Canada. I don't have, or broadly, not just in Canada. There's lots of other sources internationally.
Generally speaking, you trust the news in Canada to report the news accurately. Yeah, report the just the facts, so to speak. And do you think people can differentiate? For example, I tell people I'm not a journalist. I'm paid to offer an opinion. to react to the news and to prompt a reaction on a news story, which is what I'm doing today. Do you think people can tell the difference between opinion and news?
Well, they should be able to. They should be able to. And if I hear you say something that resonates with me, I may say, okay, that seems to make sense, or that doesn't pass the sniff test. I got to see if there's something to validate what Rob Snow has said. And so I can't just listen and go from there. I've got to be responsible for informing myself if things don't quite seem reasonable.
What about government coming to the financial aid of struggling news organizations? Where do you stand on that?
So I think that anytime anybody pays for anything, any government pays for, whether it's education, hospitals, municipalities, et cetera, there is an accountability relationship between the recipient and the payer. And I think it's dangerous to have media feeling somewhat accountable to the payer because it may influence what they report. And we want them to report the facts clearly. I think we want unbiased opinions, different perspectives. I mean, you can have biases, but have some on the left, some on the right, to use the American model. But I just think it's dangerous that the media might have to feel they have to say something or air certain information or certain types of programming in order to continue to get funding from government.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. Yeah, very well said. Thank you. Very well argued. Dallas is in Cambridge today. Hello, Dallas.
Yes, sir. Well,
yes, sir. Do you trust the news media, Dallas?
Well, he pretty much said it all right there, as far as I'm concerned. In my opinion, and it's only an opinion, of which I love your opinions because you are a pretty unbiased individual. I got to tell you that. You run a pretty smooth show.
Yeah. I have my own biases that can creep in from time to time, as I'm sure you know, Dallas.
Well, of course, we all do. But I think he said it best. The media, they love to sensationalize stuff and this sort of thing. And, like you just said, so either Blue Jays won or they didn't. There has got to be a whole lot of hoopla about it. Yeah. As far as the funding side of it goes, I also agree with one of your former callers where they said that, if it becomes equal across the board somehow, so everybody has a fair chance at being able to report what they want to report, then I agree with that. Clearly, I mean, we've been subsidizing the CBC for years, and we've all heard the arguments about that for the last 20 years. But at the end of the day, I think the onus belongs on the individual to pick out what they want and do not want to believe.
Okay. Thank you, Dallas. Yep. Good to hear from you. Let's keep them coming here, folks. Ken is up next in Calgary. Hello, Ken.
Hi.
Hi, Ken. Do you trust the news media? Do you trust the news media?
The problem I have with news media is that a lot of the time the mistrust seems to be something that they've created on their own when they get caught doing something wrong. For example, Post Media is owned by an American hedge fund, and a lot of their papers get pushed to tell a certain story that coincides with their financial interests. So I think that we have to teach information literacy, media literacy in schools. I would love to see that.
Okay. I will say, not to come to the defense of Post Media or a paper like the National Post. I mean, if you take the National Post, it was created as a kind of an editorial counterweight to what it felt was a liberal bias in the in the Canadian news media from its rivals like the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star, for example. So and its editorial coverage certainly it has and its opinion pieces it certainly has a more of a right wing slant. But people have to know that going in, right?
I am a left-wing libertarian, and so that puts me at odds with a lot of the leftist stuff. And one of those things is that I do not feel the government should be picking winners and losers. So when you're in business and who they pick to give help to can pick winners and losers.
Okay.
And it's a tricky situation where only the rich can tell the news. So I don't know that there's an easy fix for this.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Yeah. Interesting opinions all around there, Ken. Thank you. Yep. Be right back. 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. On trust in the media and government funding for the media. On Talkback on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
And just to give you the backdrop for why we're having this conversation on trust in the news media, the government funding the news media, the original plan from the previous Liberal government was to go after big tech and have big tech contribute to Canada's cultural industries. They have millions of Canadian customers, but they were never required, as Canadian companies are, to contribute to Canadian content, like film and television production, which is an important industry in many parts of the country. They shot a movie once in my hometown. Everyone was in it from miles around, Gord said. And the film and television industry employs a lot of people in Canada. They're not happy right now because the CRTC was going to triple the tax that those big U.S. companies had to pay to fund Canadian content. And the Prime Minister said to the CRTC, you have to back off on that. The Americans don't like that. We're trying to get a trade deal with the United States. And that was last week's news. And there are a lot of people quite upset by that, including all the members of ACTRA, 30,000 of them. And now we have this news report in the Globe and Mail today. This is the next shoe to drop. Ottawa to direct CRTC to scrap demands for streamers to fund local news and niche broadcasters, because some of the money from the streaming companies was going to fund local news. So the political spin in some corners of Ottawa is going to be there's Mark Carney caving to big tech in the United States. He's caving to Donald Trump, and he keeps doing things like that. And he doesn't have much to show for it. Where do you stand on this? Where do you stand on this? Do you trust the news media? And should the government be funding the news media? Because the lost funding from the streaming companies is going to be replaced by more government funding. Thomasia in Calgary. I believe I'm saying that right. Am I saying that right? Thomasia?
It's Tomasia.
Tomasia, Calgary. Thank you for calling, Tomasia. Do you trust the news media?
Yes, I'm going to preface my comments, though, because I was a broadcaster, a reporter for 30 plus years in Western Canada. So I have a different kind of spin. I always like to think that I was trustworthy, and I think that people trusted me implicitly. But I think it's also because back in the day we had different kind of standards than perhaps we have now. We have had a different type of timetable as well that we had to file our stories. So I think that a lot of the new people that are coming in have a lot of extra pressures on them, so they don't have the same kind of fact-checking abilities that we used to have. So that is on the trust. Having worked for both public and private broadcasters, I think that they both come with pros and cons. Yes, public, you're funded by the government, so you sort of have limitations, but you also have limitations as well if you work for a private broadcaster, because you answer to, a lot of times, the advertiser.
Right. Where do you stand on government funding to help the struggling industry that you were once part of?
I think that local newsrooms are vital to the communities. It saddens me so much when I see these local newsrooms being decimated, and and the real stories that matter to the communities not being told.
Okay. What about the concerns that there's a perception that compromises the news coverage?
Again, it also compromises it if you don't get funding from the government, because you're getting funding from advertisers. And a lot of times advertisers will say, I don't want that run, or that doesn't make my segment of business even look good, right? I mean, I've seen it from both directions.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. Thank you for your call. Let's go to Linda up next, Southern Alberta. Hello, Linda.
Hello, yes.
Hi,
from
Linda.
listening to the callers, my opinion is that it's money and politics influence, right? So the more money and more politics that go into something, the more influence they have. We have papers here, local papers that we get through our tax dollars because we pay property taxes. So we get free papers. And a lot of it is the feel-good stuff, the good things that happen in the event, in the communities and stuff. But there are other things that we actually get that are local. And that's my opinion, is that the other papers or the other companies and stuff, if they're owned by corporate, are they even caring about are they using the newspaper as a write-off? Because they're saying, we don't make enough money, so we're just going to close it if we don't get funding. I'm not too sure how they work their systems. Anyway, that's my opinion is, if we had journalists that are out there, reporters that are actually out there doing it. I've listened to Global and seen the morning news and said, okay, I don't have to listen anymore because they just play the same loop over and over.
Right. But do you trust the news, generally speaking, Linda? Do you trust what you see in the news or what you read in the news?
If I can collaborate it with something else, like, if somebody says, I was there and this did really happen, and then I'm saying, okay, I don't see a bias. But, even when Peter Management and Adrian Clarkson were on, I always felt there was a liberal bias, way back then. So it's my opinion of the way they're coming across to me.
All right. Thank you, Linda. Okay, got to run, Linda. Yep. Thank you. Always good to hear from you in Southern Alberta today. Be right back with a few more calls on Talkback. On the government and the news media today. It's been a hot one. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Right back to our phones for a few closing opinions on the government and the news media. Our Talkback topic today. Paul is in Halifax. First-time caller there. Hello, Paul. Hi, Paul.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, very good, Paul. Thank you. Do you trust the news media, Paul?
I actually do. And
you do? Okay.
I'm a little bit of a news hound, so I like to watch CNN, NBC. But when I really want to know that something is really going on, I trust the Canadian news media because I know it's going to be true. I know it's going to be honest. And I do believe in funding, too, for whether from the government or wherever. I think news media should be funded. I mean, we have a right to know as the people, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the way I feel about that. And funding should go also to the film industry too. How can they get started, in their life? How can they get started down the road, to what they want to do if they don't get funding? I think the film and entertainment industry is in need of funding. For all those who are just
okay. I think the flip side of that, I think the flip side of that would be Canadian content, including the news. Why is that any of the government's business?
I don't know. Right. I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. To keep everything on the level, it should all be on the level and not dictated by, because you're doing funding, if this and if that. But I don't know. Well, where else is it going to come from?
Right. Okay. You think it's important because it's helping in a way, including the news, to fund Canadian culture, to have a Canadian culture promoted, whether that's film, television, or news. Fair enough. Thank you. You're in the minority today, Paul. However, we've taken a few calls along those lines, but it's certainly been the minority opinion. Let's ask Chris in Cochrane. He's up next. Hi, Chris.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, very good, Chris. Thank you. What's your opinion, Chris? Do you trust the media?
I guess I kind of sit in between many of your callers, and I'd say I partially trust them. And it seems like many of the calls have been based not trusting it more on partisan lines, right, versus political reporting. I guess my concern is more, and I have worked not on the media side, but ones that they call for stories. Been involved in different jobs where they have called us, and then I look at the reports after. They're pretty sensationalized. So the reason I don't fully trust is because the motivation for them is obviously to sell papers, sell clicks, not to tell the truth, right? Not saying they're not telling the truth, but they definitely lead with the more sensationalized topic. And unfortunately, I don't think most people read the whole story. They read the headline and the byline, and they don't get down to the whole thing. So it does mislead people because it sells more stories to have a sensationalized story than it does to have the plain truth. If there's no story there, maybe there's no story, but they'll still run something that makes it sound very much like there is a story.
Okay, so should the government fund the news media? Very quickly, should the government help fund the news media?
I would think on the reverse, the government should fund people maybe as a tax credit to subscribe to news media, and then that funds it that way rather than then it being pushed down to them. So then it's decided.
That is out there right now. Yeah, that's out there as a government policy. I think it's 15% you can claim on your taxes if you subscribe to a news outlet. Look, thank you very much. Important conversation to have. The latest breaking news coming up next. Be back tomorrow with another Talkback on News Radio.